All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode number 3 of And Another Thing. Super pumped today to have two guys that I've known for a long time and just have meant the world to me. And I just love you, both of you dudes. So we got Alan Briggs and we got Brian Pape. And what's funny is both Pape in our relationships have talked about Briggs, and Briggs, you and I in our relationship, we've talked about Pape.
But never the twain shall meet till now. Right. This is a big moment.
This is like amazing. Look at this. Wow. Look at what God did.
You get credit for this.
Yeah. Won't he do it? Won't he do it? So guys, tell us a little bit about, I'll just have you go first, Alan. Tell us a little bit about where you are now in life, what you're doing. I mean, I've kind of been walking with you or, alongside of you for a lot of it, but talk to the people about what you do now and why you're an expert on burnout.
That last part's a little bit scary. So I get to help leaders to get healthy, stay healthy, and create healthy cultures around them. So for pastors, that looks like a church. That looks like an elder team, a staff. For a business, that could look like everything from shareholders to their CEO team. I just love it. I believe that if leaders can stay healthy, that cascades down to so many others. And unfortunately, we see on the other side, when leaders are unhealthy, that also cascades down. And that's true of parents. I mean, that's true of teachers. That's true of people in the medical field. And so God has really, I started in the pastoral zone, and God has really expanded my reach to a lot of businesses. And I see that they're encountering, 90% of the same issues that we are in the church. So that's been really fun to make those connections. So that's what I get to do all week long, and host a podcast and write books and work on content, trying to stay disciplined to make sure that I continue to put content out so that it can find people, even when I could never meet them with all the limited time that I've got.
Yeah, that's awesome. Pape, what about you? Brian Pape, ladies and gentlemen.
That's incredible. I had no idea that that's what you did. Fike shared the book with me as we were prepping to come up for this mental health series. And so I'm doing exactly the same thing that you're doing.
No way.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
but we didn't even know this.
That's wild.
But I'm mainly doing it within the Anglican world.
Okay.
And it's so like you were talking about how your work has zoned out to other disciplines, other industries. Mine's 90% church, really focused within one kind of mainline denomination. And then like 10% outside of that, various businesses.
That's cool, man.
So it's interesting, though, that what it sounds like what we share in common is leaders who have kind of been in the trenches and have both the wounds, but also the healing that God's brought into our lives. And we really, sounds like, have a passion to share that with other leaders. I really care about pastors being well.
Are they not?
I think that, today we just finished a time in worship together as a church. And I think actually part of the challenge is there's both internal reasons and external reasons why it's really difficult for pastors to be healthy. And you need a safe place as a pastor to work through those. And I think unfortunately, there's not a lot of spaces that pastors have to do that work.
Because of the tyranny of the urgent.
I think it's difficult for a lead pastor in particular, or a leader of a company to know, like, where is my space where I receive that kind of care to work through those type of things. So how am I doing? And do I really have space to speak freely about that?
And what do you call yourself? Coach?
Coach.
Okay.
Yeah. Coach, consultant. I prefer coach more than consultant.
Yeah.
What do you call yourself?
Same. Yeah, coach. Because I think that's the reason I ask is because a coach in sports is like, here's a clear advocate for you. Dude, I can't shoot the ball for you. In fact, most of the best coaches are like old. You wouldn't want them running out think of like a Phil Jackson. Everybody's enamored by the Bulls, and I'm enamored by how did he pull that group together? But it's that advocate role where it feels like everybody wants something from me, but I can want something for you and for your family, like the ripples that kind of go out. So it's my favorite word that we've come up with yet.
Yeah.
So not guru?
No.
So much pressure.
Yeah.
Expert? Oh, man.
Sensei?
Senor Miyagi.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think that perspective that a coach has. And I mean, I love what you just said. Somebody who's not wanting something from you, I think is the key. And that's the space that leaders have a hard time finding.
Yep.
Like in my world, in the denomination I'm in, it's a pretty structured world. And so a lot of the hierarchy of leadership, there's performance expectations in that. Whereas in a space like if I came to you as a pastor and got support from you, you don't need me to be anything for you. You don't want anything from me. And that gives us all kinds of freedom to do a lot of good work together.
So, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Where do you guys, outside of the church? I mean, for sure in my world, every pastor I know is exhausted. They're lonely. They don't really have a community of people that they can be real with. Because what if people found out that I'm actually a sinner? I mean, in my world, that's the reality. But in the outside world, I know you're coaching not just Christian people or professional Christians. You're coaching CEOs and businessmen. And so where are you seeing burnout in that part of the world?
It's probably 90% the same. So when I started coaching, I started coaching church planners, and that was part of my role. And so all week long, maybe not all week, but like say 3 days a week, I'm connecting with church planners. How you doing? Training, equipping. And then I started to get some calls from some pastors across the country. Hey, would you coach me? I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, sure, $100 a session. Like I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah, I will. And then I just kept saying yes, sometimes too much, and just kept saying yes. And what I thought was like, no, this has got to be a church issue. It's a pastoral issue. Well, no, certainly it's a Christian issue. That's a leadership issue. These are human issues.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
But they are coming up the chain, and then they're cascading down. And so I'm finding this, doesn't matter about age. Sure, people talk about it differently, and it's going to look different from, a boomer to Gen Z. And so I find myself at this really interesting space where I believe that God has designed us to work really hard and to rest really hard.
Yeah.
And that the pendulum swings. And so it's interesting. I see people who are like, if I could just like the 4-hour work week, if I could just, or even, like, how could I work as little as possible?
Yeah.
And sure, I understand that sentiment, but that's actually going to leave you really unfulfilled. And then the other side is, you talked about it this morning, is finding our identity and our worth through our work. That's always going to end in disappointment. Expectation here's what happens, and here's the gap. So I find everywhere the pendulum is swinging to say, what does me working really, really hard and really, really focused look like? And then peace, close my laptop, and I have different work to do in the community, in my neighborhood, with my family. Actually, this morning, the most important, no offense to anyone here, but the most important conversation I had with this morning is my son initiating him through his 12-year-old man year right now. So we're in scripture this morning. And I didn't tell you this, but dude, where did we finish? 1 Kings 19.
Amazing.
Wild. That's where he's at in the journey of the year. And he happened to be there, which of course he's missed a few days along the way. Only God, right? In that moment. So I'm literally talking, this is what dad does. Which, by the way, the body first, that's what happens in sabbatical. So we got to refresh the body first. Heart, soul, mind, body, relationships. If those are the big 5 that Jesus gives us. That's it. We're talking about rest. I love that, man. A snack and a nap, which we'll probably all hit after this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I probably needed a couple of those at the retreat this week. I probably needed a snack and a nap. I was a little grumpy.
We've been on retreats that it's like, hey, we're going to go retreat together. And we work for
Just
18 hours,
yourself.
67 line items. And we barely have time to do anything else. We're like, why are we even in Breckenridge doing
So Poppy put a quote up this morning in his sermon about Dallas Willard saying that whenever he brings Christian leaders in for a retreat, he tells them the first thing we're going to do is sleep until you can't sleep anymore.
good.
And I thought, why didn't I think of that this
So
week? Like
good.
that would have been amazing at our retreat.
Yeah.
So but I want to hear from both of you guys. Not just, I'm thinking through the lens of like, I'm a pastor. I asked you this question yesterday, but how do I as a pastor or I as a human being, how do I see the signs of burnout coming so that I can go, okay, wait a minute, I'm getting pretty close to a cliff here. How do I see it in myself?
You shared some great ones today. So share some of those.
Yeah. So let me see if I can remember my own sermon.
Yeah.
The test.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that you find out pretty quickly the people who are really close to the pastor, if they are married, their spouse, if they have children, their children, especially if the children are old enough, obviously you wouldn't go directly to the child to answer this question, but the people closest to that leader probably know if there's a pattern of overworking. I think that's the first sign. Does dad overwork? Not does he work hard, but does he overwork?
Yeah.
Is there a regular transgression of boundaries that have been set?
That's interesting you say that. Justice, about a year into me doing this job, I was a worship pastor for 22 years. And he said to me about a year in, he goes, I don't think I've ever seen you work this hard ever. And I was like, both like inspired and offended.
Tell me more.
Like, what? But he was like, dude, you're giving your whole heart to this thing. And I don't think I saw you do that. Sorry, all my former pastor bosses that might be watching this, but he noticed that in me. And so I wonder if he was noticing, maybe not so much, but
yeah. That's the first and largest one. Obviously I shared a few others, but what do you think about warning signs? So overwork for me, and how do you, a lot of times the gifted racehorse of a visionary planter or a CEO or an entrepreneur is not going to know that that's happening.
Right.
So this is why I'm pointing out, you have to have people who really love them and that are for them, probably be part of that conversation to really get an honest answer.
Yeah, which gets back to that whole, it's not a me problem, it's a we problem. Yeah. So who's your we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is that burnout sneaks up on you. So I think in Satan's irony and I think just in even the cruelty of what burnout is, we're the last to see it. It sneaks up on you.
Yeah.
And by then, it's like hydration in Colorado. If you're going to go climb a mountain, you needed to be drinking water 48 hours ahead of time. If you're halfway up and you're thirsty, then you're screwed. Like, I hate to tell you, but you need to go down. Because
so that's the trick. Because I got him off the airplane and we went right to Breck and we were right to the tennis court. And he had a really hard night that night. You should have been drinking water for 48 hours ahead of time.
So challenging.
This is not exactly how that went. But no, so I love, so this was one of the things that, when you're studying a passage of scripture and you study and you study and study, and you think you're never going to exhaust it. But one of the things that stood out to me going into this weekend on 1 Kings 19, the story of Elijah, was, man, this snuck up on him.
Yeah.
I drank more H2O for the 24 hours prior to landing at the Colorado Springs airport. But you're talking about a longer gap than that.
Yeah.
I thought I had hydrated enough to land, go to elevation, and then extreme exertion at 10,000 feet. It's what we were doing.
That'll preach that idea of, man, I thought I had enough in the tank. And so that's why, Sabbath is coming for us. And it's always, I don't really need it. Sabbatical for those who get that opportunity. Oh, it's coming. I don't really need it. And that's what everybody says. We're always more tired than we think. We're running on adrenaline and sometimes caffeine. And so I just think, like, parental adrenaline. You get home from work. What thing are we going to the school again for? Are you serious? What are all these things we're doing? My kids aren't even signed up for that many things. Night after night after night after night. And the joy of, I've heard this JOMO instead of FOMO, the joy of missing out.
Oh, that's cool.
And when you can just go, you know what? I'm putting my sweatpants on and I'm going to do nothing because then I won't go outside because I look like a slob right now. Yeah. And just that idea of like, no, we need this. And sometimes God intervenes and we have like a snowy Colorado day in early May and you're like, I don't want to do anything. Other times it's sickness, which our bodies are speaking out on that. Other times it's, a bum knee or something like that. And you're like, you know what? I was going to go, whatever, do something good, but I guess this is best right now to just recover. So the stuckness, you're talking about that. So many leaders like, I feel stuck. And when they say I am stuck, I said, no, you feel stuck. You're not.
That's good.
And we have this binary thinking. It's either or. You should either stay in this role forever or quit. And I'm like, whoa, if those are the only two options, time out. And that's what I look for is binary thinking as well. What would have to be true or what other options are there somewhere in the middle? And I find there's usually some really reasonable options there. So what else? What else do you see, man?
Yeah, man, I really like that, Alan. I think something we talked about this morning, you get to a place where you've actually started to isolate. And I think in our digitally driven world, this is really hard to diagnose. When am I as a leader actually at a place where I'm isolating?
Yeah.
And not being vulnerable, not having places where I'm receiving care. It's a very vulnerable thing as a high capacity leader to talk about being tired. it's a very vulnerable thing as a high capacity leader to talk about addictions.
Yep.
So where are you going to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, so where do you do that? Where's your place at which you are actually really being known and knowing others? And so your question to us was, what are some of the warning signs? When I don't have spaces that I am able to be totally real and transparent,
Right.
and I mean totally real and transparent. I'm in the Anglican tradition, and so we actually have an encouragement. Not everybody does it, to have like a confessor. That's like a spiritual director / confessor, where like I'm actually confessing everything. Everything is in the light.
Yeah.
And I, there's been seasons of my time where that's really been true. That practice has really been true and really freeing. But not only people who might be in sort of a therapeutic or even spiritual director role, which are really needed, but friends.
Yeah.
Leaders
need friends.
We need friends.
Yeah.
And so one of the joys of my friendship with you, that I got a little off track, I didn't say it as clearly as I wanted to at the end, was places of mutuality where I can be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that, for some reason, that word to me is really significant. Leaders need places where there's mutuality, where I am one of at the table, and I am both giving and I am receiving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when that's not true in my life, I'm isolating. And it's really dangerous because it sneaks up on you. It's not like you can't go 6 months without what we just described.
Yeah.
But a lot of times we go years. And so hiding.
So what's interesting is that word isolation. We talk about loneliness versus isolation a lot. Is that loneliness is common to man. I mean, Jesus felt lonely. And yet isolation is not. It is bad news. And so we say loneliness is a feeling common to man, but isolation's a choice. It's a way.
Wow.
It's a way of living.
Wow.
And so often we feel something must be wrong with me. I feel lonely within a crowd. And it's like, man, parenting our kids in the way of Jesus can feel lonely. Saying no to so many of the cultural pressures can feel lonely. Sometimes Sabbathing, you look around and you're like, well, I guess it's just me. Nobody else is really doing this.
Right.
And so I want to actually normalize loneliness and demonize isolation. And there's a huge difference between those two.
Like I just need to stop and think about that.
That's rich. That's really
powerful,
rich.
Alan. That's amazing. What kind of feedback have you been getting from your book? Let's talk about your book. We got a copy here. In fact, a signed copy. Aren't you jealous of this book?
This is mine.
I know. I know. But here's Anti-Burnout. So tell us about this book and like what kind of feedback you're getting on it.
Man, it's the longest it's ever taken me to write a book and the shortest it's ever taken me. So I would say it's about a dozen years. But when I'm working with church planners back in the day, and I had about a 10-year span of working specifically with planters, what I started to realize is everyone's training for the launch. Nobody's training for longevity. I'm going to be the guy for the long haul. And I thought that was career suicide. Who wants to work on their health? Who wants to be like, you're going to need this 10 or 20 years from now? And at that point, I'm thinking nobody. I'm thinking, what am I doing? But I'm compelled here. I can't just keep training people to launch something big. What about 3 years from now? And I started to watch sort of, the burnout spiral happen. Families move away, and the whole family pays for it, right? Those closest to your circle pay for it most. And so it's been years germinating in tools and ideas and QR codes and all these things. That's what I regularly do. I mean, most of my week is investing these into leaders. But God hadn't said right yet. So I was actually up in the mountains. I'm at 11,000 feet. And I wake up and God just said, right, it's time to write. And so that was 5.5 months ago. So it's 5 months start to finish.
Unbelievable.
In that, but yet it's been 13 years germinating.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you didn't write a song in 10 minutes. That song's been germinating for a while, but it actually came out in 10 minutes, that kind of thing. So with that said, like, I'm so excited to have a complimentary resource versus just coaching, because coaching's expensive, time, money, energy, and it's not for everybody. Here's what I'd say too, is I stripped a lot of religious language away.
That's cool.
And so if you're watching this and you're like, well, but that person doesn't run a Christian company. Our mutual friend, John, he's a Christian at a company that's not a Christian company. And so many of our elders, so many leaders in churches are there. And so I feel called to bridge the gap where I'm like, listen, this is why is love. And this is why I believe there's a lighter way to live and lead. It's because Jesus told us that there was.
Yeah.
This is why I love my neighbor. This is why I believe we should have compassion and empathy and joy and all these things at work, is because my faith tells me so. But I had some lazy language around it that I'd be like, oh, and the gospel. And oh yeah, and Jesus says this, and they're like, "Who's this Jesus you speak of? What is this? What do you mean by this?" So I had to strip a lot of language away, and so I'll probably get 4 or 5 bad reviews on it. There wasn't enough Jesus in here, and I'm like, "Hey, John Mark Comer's amazing. Dallas Willard's amazing." Like I don't prove to be any of those giants, but I do stand in this strange tension spot as a bridge between those who know Jesus and go, "Yeah, we're actually invited into Sabbath. We're commanded for Sabbath. We're set up for this. It's sustained the Jews for a couple thousand years now." I think Sabbath is here to stay.
Yeah.
And this world that is just so desperate for rest. And so I really see this almost as an evangelistic opportunity for this bad boy. These seeds, we don't know where they're going to go. I signed this for somebody you're going to give it to. We beautifully lose control like we do with music or whatever else. So how's it going? I'm hearing real stories. One guy had to pull over in traffic here in our city because waterworks, she couldn't see. Because she's like, I'm so much closer to burnout than I thought.
Wow.
And I need to take it seriously. The next week we ask her to do something. And in her sweet spot, she literally said, I can't. And so I'm like, yes, you're doing this. You're living this out. So those kind of stories all day. You don't write books to make tons of money. You write books for seeds to go out to the right places and germinate there. So I think we just sent a bunch of 45 or 50 out to pastors. We have some going out to entrepreneurs in a couple weeks. So I'm just thrilled, man, to just see it going out to the world.
That's awesome, man. And it so fits like what you said during the interview time of our service today about how that Jesus people, the people of God, have had an answer to burnout.
We're positioned for this moment right now.
Which is the whole theme of this Your Brain in Your Bible series, is to say that science is catching up with God.
Yeah.
And that he's cared deeply about our rest from the beginning of it all and prescribed it for us.
I mean, think about the holism right there. Like, how deep of a statement? Love the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, love your neighbor as yourself. What clinician would not say that holism is healthy? Heart, soul, mind, body, relationships. There's probably a matrix out there of concentric circles that say those are the domains that you need.
Yeah, some secular person is going, here's how to live your life.
This is brilliant. Yeah. I've studied for 40 years, and at the end of my career, Jesus actually said that. Yeah. It's like the thing we need to be doing.
Yeah. Welcome to the party.
That's why it's like, this is the moment. Like, if I could just give this to somebody to go, freak out, I don't have words for who Jesus is, then like read this and let's talk about it. What's missing?
Yeah.
That I think we're positioned for this moment.
That's really cool. And Pape, I mean, so, you're in a totally different season. You shared a little bit in your sermon, and it was obviously emotional for you, but you've walked through burnout as a human being, and you've walked through it, you've walked in it, you walked past it. So just talk a little bit about like what you learned about you. I mean, obviously, I thought what you shared today was unbelievably applicable to everybody, whether you're a Christian or not.
Personal,
totally,
yeah, relational.
So, but give us a little behind the scenes of like that experience and what you didn't share in the sermon.
So I think that, gosh, that's a big question, and I also just talked for almost an hour.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
well, so how did you? To the first part of your question, how did you heal?
That's a good question.
So let me tell you that I don't. This might be hard for somebody listening to hear me say this because it's not always going to be true. But Jen and I were really together in this, and I think that's huge. So on in two ways, we were both burned out. I didn't talk much about this. I mentioned at the outset of our chat here in the service about how burnout doesn't care who you are or what your vocation is. Like, right, it's a human problem, to your words. So Jen is a physician, and burnout's a huge problem in that vocation. They're actually discipled to overwork. It's seen as like, it's an understatement to say it's
From
a badge
med
of
school,
honor.
This is what you do.
Through med school and residency, you are discipled, apprenticed to overwork, outperform, hurry, all in the name of helping others. Now, that's a significant similarity to vocational ministry.
I think that's right. Yeah.
So because you're in a, quote, helping profession, you feel like you can justify it. And what we started to realize, so a couple of things. I had to get in touch with that. The first person that's really paying the price for this is me. And does that matter to the Lord? And I was not in touch with that. That like the Lord really cared about how I was doing. that I was not just to be used up. Something you wrote here. You wrote it on the other one. Life's too short to burn out. You're too precious to burn out.
Amen.
And so I hadn't connected that to like, I didn't know the Lord really cared about me that much. But because we were both going through it, it was pretty dark for us. And because we had both been so accustomed to high output, high performing, we couldn't self-diagnose. Like in our own marriage, this is just like kind of what we do. Like we got married and then we went off to the like graduate school, med school, and then that whole apprenticeship process I just named. So, I think that being on the same page about being generous and kind and curious as a spouse. So I did not realize how much my vocation had negatively impacted my spouse. So part of my answer was, you're too precious to burn out. The second group of people that are paying the price is the people you love the most as a leader and are actually getting the least of you.
Yeah.
And so I didn't talk a lot about that. It was not okay that my wife and my children were getting fumes.
Right.
And so, but being really gracious to each other, because it took us a while to get to that place where we were running on fumes. And then how are we going to get well? Well, that's going to take time. And so I didn't get into this a lot. I one line, I think that I said that, but Jen and I are now 2 to 3 years post this moment. And yeah, we're doing all right. We're much better than we were, but we're being really generous to each other and not just immediately, we're not trying to flip a switch. And I'm looking forward to reading this, Alan, because I think you get into some of this, that like, there really is a lighter way to live and lead. There really are unforced rhythms of grace that I think we really are doing those, but there's also there's a togetherness. I think if you are married and you're going through this, you need to do the work to get on the same page together, because it's going to take time and you're really going to need each other to get well. So
it's interesting you're talking about that. It's people, so it's similarities in ministry or wherever you're at. You're working with people and you're responsible for results. That's the burnout zone. I mean, what industry does that not touch at some level? But working with people and responsible for results. And so whether it's, I mean, I quote Seth Godin in the book, who's a marketing dude, that basically says that's a recipe for burnout, is trying to control things you can't control, right? I love when psychology issues or matches up with what's in scripture. I love not only when science, but the latest books or pop culture is like, wait, we need this. It's exposing this. My favorite but haunting definition of burnout is voluntary self-exploitation.
Oh, wow.
When I heard that, I was like, wow, voluntary, we do it to ourselves. Nobody would be that mean to be like 80 hours a week or else. All these results or else. But we would voluntarily. And then we're doing it to ourselves, the expectations. And then we're literally exploiting ourselves in what's being called an achievement society. Because it's never enough in an achievement society. If this is the bar, nobody's telling me you have to be there, Fike, but I think I can, or Alan or Poppy, like, here's where I need to be. And rest is literally waging war on that. Because like, I guess it's okay if other people pass me. I guess it's okay if God just does this work. I guess it's okay if I'm just not available for a week. And it's still like an I guess. It never gets like fully
What if it's really not about me?
Ooh.
I don't really want to think about that.
Well, that's a little too much. I don't know.
We started our conversation this week, and we'll end it. I'll just say this to you that are watching this. Poppy was telling me as we were walking into a tennis match, we were talking about this phrase: nothing to prove and nothing to hide. And I think that if there is an antidote to burnout, it's that you could say that my life is marked by those two ideas. That I'm living in such a way that I've got nothing to prove and I've got nothing to hide, that I'm known that for flaws and all, and I do think that the hardest part about being a pastor, the occupational hazard, is this sense that that's the holy man. And so, okay, well, if I've got to be the holy man, then that means I can't be unspooled before anybody. I can't be real before anybody. And so, one of the things that I'm really working hard to do as a pastor at this church is to say, look, if you're looking for somebody to live up to, it ain't me. It's Jesus. And I'm trying to reach that same pinnacle, And so just to be honest and real before each other. And so I would just say to you, I would challenge you, I would encourage you, I would inspire you to ask yourself the question, am I living with nothing to prove and with nothing to hide? And if you would say, no, I'm not, then I think that's a warning sign that you have to look in the mirror and say, well, who am I trying to prove anything to? What am I trying to earn? What am I trying to make sure everybody knows about me that I can't find in the face of God? And we started this series with the idea that we find our identity, our purpose, and our sense of character, our sense of belonging by looking to God and saying, who am I and whose am I? You tell me, because you're the only real source of truth in this world. And so I would encourage you today as we finish that you would do exactly that you would look to God and say, Lord, I don't want to prove anything and I don't want to hide anything. And I would just encourage you to do that. Guys, thank you so much for what you're doing for the people of God and for the people in the world, that you guys have decided, I want to help. I don't just want to know this. I want to, share this with people and help them. So we'll put all of your social media stuff so people can connect. Where can they find the book, Alan?
Amazon, Anti-Burnout.
Where can't you find anything, right? Amazon, right? Hey, God bless you. And we'll see you next week. Next week, we're talking about probably the most evergreen subject in the whole series, anxiety. And so we'll talk about sort of like clinical anxiety and then over-the-counter anxiety, because you may say, I don't have clinical anxiety, so that doesn't apply to me. Anxiety applies to all of us, and we're going to talk about it next week. God bless you. Thanks for joining us for another episode of And Another Thing.
Hi there. Thank you for tuning in today. We want to know, what is your next step? Would you email us at info@movementchurch.co and let us know what the Lord is asking you to do and how we can help. If you'd like to contribute to the Movement Church, and we'd appreciate if you do, you can text any amount you would like to give to the number 84321, and it will help you do that. You can find the Movement Church on all social media platforms, and we'd ask that you give us a follow and stay connected so that you too can be a part of our story. Remember, God is for you, and so are we.